Member Watkins with her hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just make a few comments and then I'll see if our staff wants to clarify some of the stuff that was brought up in the by the public. I too want to just really thank our staff for their hard work on this and our community for ongoing engagement, and just really recognize the really large, complex societal issue that we're really trying to do our best to address in the context of also learning from what we get right along the way, changing what we don't get right along the way, but continuing to find solutions to support the health of those who are unhoused in our community as well as the health of our entire community as a whole. I'm really encouraged that the state is stepping up and hopeful that we can advocate that for small cities like ours to get a good amount of funding to support the need here. And also really looking at prioritizing additional programming and restorative justice programming, thinking about a navigation center, and ultimately really trying to find ways to support individuals either into supportive living environments or on a path to their independence and success in our community. I understand the concerns and I appreciate the input to help us refine that. And I know that we've also spent a significant amount of time on this topic as well. And so I feel confident that, unless there's any major questions still pending from my colleagues, I'm prepared to move the recommendation with the additional changes. I would also just add how I want to echo what Councilmember Cummings brought up and really prioritizing families and seeing how we're continuing to align our interest in supporting families into the county's prioritization of families into the continuum of care, and however that is built into this recommendation as well, and encouraged by thinking creatively around things like how an app or technology can be part of our solutions too, in terms of really on moment time of what's available to get people housed and in better sheltering. I also want to recognize the value of the next steps that were outlined, particularly around tracking data, identifying need, and refining and potentially expanding based on need. And so I think it's something that we're going to continue to see brought forward, and continuous improvement has to be our North Star. And so, but also balancing the need to do something. So with that, I'm prepared to move the recommendation with the changed language as suggested by staff.
Member Watkins, I see Councilmember Collin Johnson has her hand up. I'll call.
Yes, thank you. And I'll second that motion with one friendly amendment. I heard Steve Strong mention section, I'm looking at my notes, 6.36050C, and to make the same addition that added to 6.360.050D. So if you're okay with that, Councilmember Watkins, to add that as well to the staff recommendation?
I'm okay with that, yes.
Okay, and I did have some comments. I too want to thank, again, the staff for your incredible work. What you've accomplished in the last few weeks is really, truly, I'm in awe. That was a lot of, and I know that there's other opportunities that you are working through with service providers in the community that haven't quite formulated yet. And I want to thank the members of the community for your letters and your emails and your phone calls and staying engaged on this very important issue. I've brought this up in past meetings around this issue, and I'm going to bring it again. It's just passion that is used all the time. One definition I've heard of compassion, the word compassion in Sanskrit is karuna, and how that's defined is that my heart is broken to act. And that is what I truly see us doing right now is we are acting, we are in action. It's not perfect, it's not complete, and it never will be because we can't do it alone. Robert Singleton said this is an issue that's happening in all jurisdictions up and down the coast. Mayor Myers spoke to that as well. We're not alone. We can't do it alone, and yet we have to take action. We have to be moving forward. And what I see that's shifted in the last couple of months since we've addressed this issue is that we truly have flipped it so that we're focusing on services. We're focused on solutions, and we're focusing on contributing to the larger spectrum of services that are needed. No 150 safe sleeping sites is not enough. And we know that there's going to be more that's going to happen. One caller mentioned we want managed camps. We want faith communities and nonprofits to be involved. That's exactly what we're pursuing with the RFQ process. The city is proposing to do this by themselves because we can't do it by ourselves. And we'll hear more about this next week from our county partners, but we know that the county has a work plan the next 6 months that really, truly ties into what we're doing. What we're doing is aligned with the county. We heard that the governor approved dollars for homelessness. As a grant writer, I know what it takes to be competitive as a community. Funders want to see communities that are in action. Funders want to see that we are capable of moving forward with solutions. And so this is a step in that direction. And so when the state sees that we have made progress and we have stood up 150 safe sleeping sites in a matter of months, they're going to want to fund us because they're going to want to see our efforts progress and expand. Those are some of my comments. One other comment about public space. I just want to reiterate what Chief Hyduke said at the very beginning of this council meeting, so some of our listeners may not have been on, that one of the number one source of fires are unmanaged encampments. And we all remember what happened a year ago. It was way too close. And so these efforts, this ordinance, are to mitigate the negative impacts that can cause harm to all members of our community, including those who are unhoused. So I'll just keep my comments to that, but just remembering again, is my heart broken to act, and I'm happy to see that our community is acting. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. So we have a motion by Councilmember Watkins, seconded by Councilmember Kalantari-Johnson to go with the staff recommendation with the additional additions. I do have one motion maker. There was also a suggestion for section 6.3, 6.04A2. It's adding the word in or. I did check with Lee Butler. He does seem to be supportive of that. Can that be part of your motion as well?
Yes, absolutely.
And then I just have one quick, and then I see Councilmember Cummings and Councilmember Brown. The one thing I just didn't recognize in my earlier comments was I also just want to recognize my colleagues because we've had this before us, I think 4 or 5 times now. We've had, literally thousands of letters. We've had hundreds of people show up to the meetings. Not everyone has been able to speak. We've also just individually fielded literally hundreds of calls and hundreds of emails, met with hundreds of people. I looked back through my binder today, and I see that every council member has actually been a part of building this ordinance. There is language from each and every single one of you in this ordinance. And so that is what it looks like to create a law together. And I think that needs to be really recognized is that it may not be perfect. It may not be what all of us want, but this is an ordinance that has been through a process of deliberation and addition. And I want to just recognize my colleagues that you have all tried to add what you think are the most important pieces to this. And I think that it has obviously become much improved. It is very much focused on service provision and being able to do outreach and some of the things that I think have been missing in past camping ordinances and in past kinds of efforts that I don't think really acknowledge that, unfortunately, because of the severity of the issues we do have to spend resources to help people who are experiencing homelessness in our town. And so we have to balance that with a lot of other investments that we also need to be doing with our local businesses and into our parks and for our families so that they can take our parks and rec programs and go to the teen center. So it's a balance for a little city like us. But I do want to recognize that everybody's had a piece in this, and I appreciate everyone's work on this. And next up, I have Councilmember Cummings.
Mayor, if I could interrupt before we get too far. What was your friendly amendment? What was your friendly amendment? What
my friendly amendment was to add for section 636.040A2, in the last sentence, it would say, safe sleeping facilities shall not be located in or adjacent to residential neighborhoods or schools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to thank the members of the public who chimed in tonight. I had a couple questions, and then I had a comment. My first question, a member of the public reached out, and this is a question for staff. They were wondering, and I know this might not be the time for this conversation, but they were wondering if there are going to be any kinds of barriers for people being able to, utilize these safe sleeping sites. So certain shelters, for example, will have certain conditions for being able to gain access to those shelters, and they were asking whether or not there'd be barriers in place, and if so, what those barriers might be. So I just thought I'd ask on behalf of this member of the public.
Sure, thank you for that question. So we want to have as many low barrier locations as possible. That's not to say all locations will be low barrier. We may have organizations that offer to run facilities in a very effective and economical manner, and they, they themselves may have certain thresholds that people need to meet with, or certain barriers. But we want to, as part of our facilities, have as low a barrier as we can, so long as it's remaining a safe location for people to be.
Great, thanks. And then I just had one other question, because this really gets to the comments that we've been hearing around sites going into neighborhoods, and so like in or adjacent to neighborhoods. And maybe this is for the city attorney. Is there a clear definition of what is considered adjacent to a neighborhood? Because it's something that I'm trying to really understand. Because I mean, Santa Cruz is I feel like almost everything is adjacent to a neighborhood in Santa Cruz, and so when we're considering citing and saying that you can't be in or adjacent to neighborhoods, I'm wondering if you can help clarify in terms of proximity what that would mean.
So the ordinance does not contain a clear definition of adjacent to, and the thought is that the establishment of these safe sleeping sites and any managed encampments will be an iterative process. And so through working with the community to bring forward safe sleeping locations as they're identified, we expect to hear about it if a safe sleeping site is set up in a way that intrudes upon an adjacent residential area. So that's the intent. We didn't want to be too specific because you're exactly right. In that case, the exceptions start to rule. So that's the reason for that.
Okay. Thanks. I just have a few comments, and I actually have a substitute motion that I'd like to make. And I just really want to appreciate the mayor's comments, around us being able to provide input into this. And I think that, we've all been able to provide some level of input into this. But the one thing that I've been hearing from the community and that I've been expressing throughout this process is that many people feel like that there hasn't been enough outreach and opportunity for community members to weigh in. And so I I have more concerns around the process that we've had with bringing this forward. A number of members of the public contacted me, and this is for many people, they feel like this is a new ordinance that's coming before them, and they haven't really had a chance to look it over and weigh in. And while I think that we need to find a balance in the community around what we're going to getting the impacts of homelessness, but then also trying to provide services to people. I think it's also really critical that we're providing people with an opportunity to weigh in a meaningful way. It's based on the conversations we've had. I mean, we started this conversation back in February. It's now May. Based on some feedback we heard earlier from city staff, it doesn't seem like this is going to be up and running until probably late June, possibly even July. And with that, I wonder if, just based on the timeline for the RFQ, identifying provider, signing contracts, getting everything up and running, it's likely going to take, at least another month and a half, possibly even 2 months until we actually have something up and running. And I feel like within, for members of the public who have expressed that they would like to have more opportunity to weigh in, it seems like we could use that time to provide more outreach and more engagement with the community, especially seeing as how what's before us tonight is, the first reading of an ordinance, and we agreed that we weren't going to bring forward, what we previously had. So I think for a lot of members of the public, they feel like if this is something different, they've only had a few days to kind of look it over. And so I'll see if Bonnie, if you could put up the substitute motion that I'd like to make. So I emailed over some language, Bonnie.
Oh, is it not sharing?
Well, we just...
Yeah, your word screen.
Yeah. So given we have some potential time to have more outreach occur, I thought, what might seem like a good compromise would be to direct staff to continue moving forward with establishing safe sleeping and storage programs as previously directed, provide a minimum of 2 public meetings for members of the public, including us individuals, to provide feedback on the ordinance and input on what they would like to see come forward and their concerns. Provide updates on feasibility of establishing safe sleeping and storage programs, including costs, potential operators, sources of funding, scope of work, and any other relevant information, and bring forward an updated ordinance along with an emergency ordinance for adoption when it is clear what programs are feasible and locations for sleeping and storage services after receiving public input. And the comments I'll make around that is that, there's still a lot, staff mentioned that there's going to be a lot of outreach going on into the community around what these programs will be and how we can stand them up and who the providers are. And, it seems like we really want to understand what is feasible in terms of the programs before we have laws that we're creating around these programs. So it's not clear what might be that we can provide more services. We can increase those beds above 150. Or it might be that we can't find a provider that's able to provide those 150 beds. So the thought here is that, by providing this kind of direction, we can continue moving forward, provide the community with an opportunity to give us more feedback. And Tony, please correct me, you can weigh in on this, but my understanding, just based on the years of being on council, is that, if we were at a point where, for example, we have a storage, we have a service provider for storage, safe sleeping, the council could potentially pass an emergency ordinance that would immediately take effect, and we could also pass the regular ordinance that would then take effect after a second reading in 90 days. Is that a correct?
Yes, if the council makes findings to establish the basis for declaring an emergency, then the council can adopt an emergency ordinance that takes effect immediately, I believe with the 5-vote majority.
And just to follow up on that question as well, I mean, the council did the homeless state of emergency back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. So under that, assumption, we technically, and we haven't changed that. So with that,
the council readopted that in August of last year as well.
Right.
But I would add that the homeless or the shelter crisis declaration really is designed to provide a mechanism for establishing shelters without strictly complying with building and zoning codes. So it's not really the exact same thing, but you have declared that there's a shelter emergency in effect right now.
I guess it would also be safe to say, I mean, my comment would be that I think it's also safe to say that we are in a bit of an emergency. The fact that, with our current homeless situation. So that's a friendly or a substitute motion that I'd like to put on the table for consideration. And again, I want to thank all my colleagues and members of the public for hanging in during all the time we've spent on this item.
Councilmember Brown?
I'll second that. And given that I think I know where that's going, I'll just make my comment while I have the floor. I'm not comfortable with moving the recommendation we have forward for many reasons, and I'm not going to go through all of them here. Although I will say that Ms. Holder, pretty much said what I'm thinking and said it much more articulately. So that's kind of where I stand. So I'll just put in two categories. I'll start with the practical or instrumental. And I think that's gets to part of why Councilmember Cummings, I think, brought this substitute motion forward. Passing an ordinance when we don't even know if we can actually do the things that have said we need to do in order to operationalize the ordinance just seems really cart before the horse to me. It's and potentially self-defeating, really. I mean, we need a clear understanding, and I'm hopeful because we're hearing, and I understand staff is working very hard, and I'm hopeful for that. But given that we have never been able to figure before, it's hard to imagine that all of a sudden we're going to figure it out and make it happen in this short amount of time. So I think we really do need a clearer understanding of what we can actually do, what the city can do, what operators can do before we say we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're really kind of misleading the public, I think. I imagine others don't agree with that, but I kind of feel like we are if we can't really, operationalize an ordinance without, a whole bunch of other steps. And then the other kind of general area of concern that I have is obviously ethical, leading with compassion. I agree. We should be leading with compassion, and we should be focusing on trauma interventions rather than enforcement, enforcement-focused interventions. The nurse who talked about, chemo patients, thinking about them and the hardship this creates on top of multiple layers of hardship. And suffering. I mean, that's not hyperbole. There's at least one person, who was displaced yesterday, who is going through chemo. And so this is real. This is the experience people are having in the world. They're human beings, to even the discussion about, adjacent to schools and neighborhoods and basically, trying to get us to where for people to go and suggesting that because one is without a house that they are somehow shouldn't be anywhere near a school is just, it's just disturbing, that kind of narrative. It was interesting, Councilmember Kalantari Johnson, that you and I'm really interested to hear that the word compassion in Sanskrit is really focused on, my heart is broken to act, because I feel right now, and I'm not going to go on any longer about it, but I have to say that my heart is breaking with this act that we are considering here. Not all of it, obviously, but certainly the criminalization part without knowing that we can actually meet people's needs. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion on the floor. Tony, I believe procedurally we have to first take a vote to accept the substitute motion and then vote on it, correct?
That is correct.
Just want to make sure new council members are aware of that. So Councilmember Watkins, did you have a comment?
I had a question.
Go ahead, please.
Is that okay? Tony, you mentioned the emergency ordinance, you'd have to make findings, but I'm confused that if we're planning to have an emergency ordinance, then isn't that sort of putting the cart before the horse, because we then would have to retroactively find the findings to make that happen? I feel like that usually comes as a consequence of the findings, not looking for findings to justify the ordinance. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated because the findings necessary to justify an emergency ordinance are sort of quasi-legislative, and so the council's determination that a state of emergency exists is a policy statement that the council makes. The way I think about it is there a need to take immediate action so that the ordinance can take effect immediately? I think our circumstance really, just as a policy matter, I don't think our circumstance neatly fits into that, because we're dealing with such a long-term chronic problem, and the ordinance contemplates that it will be implemented as the city rolls out these additional services and resources. So, sorry if I can't answer your question more clearly, but it's certainly not like an approaching fire or imminent weather event or something of that nature.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful information, because essentially what I really read into a lot of this is that a lot of the direction is the direction we're already moving in terms of public outreach that's going to be forthcoming as well. And frankly, having been on the council now for 4 years and just living in this community, I think, it's been an often really circular conversation, because it's just so challenging and nuanced and complicated, and people are complicated and people are unhoused of all types, and to the point where it feels sometimes paralyzing. And I just recognize the wanting to have, a balance between engagement and action. And I think, that it's individual, right? Whatever that feels like for the individual person who feels like they've struck that balance. And I think there's a real tendency and often difficulty around really moving from process to action and continuing to have that feedback loop in terms of how to, as I mentioned earlier, for continuous improvement. And I think that also by not doing anything, we really do run the risk of continuing to have nothing as a tool to mitigate entrenched unmanaged encampments, which are significantly challenging for our community, for those that are residing there, for those that are surrounding it, and have not been the most healthy way for us to work on this issue in a meaningful way to help our community stay healthy, as well as to help the individuals in those encampments. So I don't feel comfortable with this motion for those reasons.
I see Vice Mayor Brunner. Did you have a comment on before we vote? this would be on the two votes. Vote to accept the substitute and then vote on this. And if that goes forward, then we would vote on the substitute motion.
I had question on the substitute motion, and just for clarification, public meetings on the current ordinance in today. Is that your intention, Councilmember Cummings? It says provide a minimum of 2 public meetings for members of the public to provide feedback on the ordinance and input on what they would like to see come forward and concerns regarding this current draft version before us today. Okay. And then bring forward an updated ordinance along with an emergency ordinance for adoption. Can you just explain that intention?
Sure. So, Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, Tony, I just want to understand procedure here. Should we be taking the vote to accept the substitute motion first? I'm not sure if we should be dialoguing if the substitute motion might not succeed. That's my only just.
It's not required. I might suggest that if the council, that before the council debates the substitute motion, you might want to consider on whether to accept the substitute motion, and then you can debate on its merits or advocate for or against it.
Right. Yeah. I think really that's the purpose of the vote to accept it, right, Tony? Okay. Right.
Before I accept it or decide to accept it, I want to understand just the clarity of the intention. Is that okay? I'm not debating anything.
Yeah, no, I understand, Vice Mayor. I'm actually just looking for some of Tony, your thoughts on. I'm just trying to follow procedure. Tony, your thoughts?
Both the motion. Both a motion, a substitute motion is debatable, so there can be discussion, as there has been, on whether or not to accept the substitute motion. It's not something that can't be debated. I just thought that it might be a more efficient way to actually get to the heart of what action the council is going to take tonight.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and. Well, Vice Mayor Bruder, it sounds like why don't you go ahead with your questions, and then I've heard from Councilmember Cummings, I've heard from Councilmember Brown. I'd like to take a vote on whether to accept the substitute motion, but since Vice Mayor Bruner, I don't want to cut you off, so let's go ahead and finalize that, and then we'll vote on whether or not to accept the substitute motion, and then deliberate if it succeeds.
So my question was the intention of adding the direction of bringing forward an updated ordinance along with an emergency ordinance.
And in addition to that, did you want me to provide clarity on the public meetings? Okay, so to the first point, the public meetings, the idea behind this would be that we currently have a draft of an ordinance, and that the staff would be directed to go out to the community, hold, a minimum of 2 meetings, whether that's in person or online, where community members could provide back on the ordinance that's before us today. And I included also, trying to have outreach with the unhoused communities to get feedback on the ordinance and provide people with more time to better understand the ordinance and review it. The fourth bullet is that should those meetings occur and that there are recommendations, the staff would bring back an updated ordinance with those recommendations. And the emergency ordinance, the reason why I put that in is because if there's a circumstance under which we can, if people are concerned with being able to act swiftly on this, an emergency ordinance could potentially be used to make something happen more immediately was trying to get at the concerns around council members feeling like if we delay, then that's going to delay when we can implement this ordinance. And so the idea would be we have an emergency ordinance that's in place, and then we adopt the official ordinance, which would then take a second reading in 90 days. 90 days, correct, Tony, to implementation?
30 days after the second reading. 30 days.
So that's the intention of those two parts of the motion.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, so we will go ahead and we have a motion for a substitute motion made by Councilmember Cummings, seconded by Councilmember Brown. So we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote on the substitute motion. We want to hear that.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmembers Watkins?
No.
Kalantari Johnson?
No.
Brown?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Golder?
No.
Vice Mayor Brunner?
Aye.
Mayor Myers?
No. So that motion, just grab my script here. So that motion fails with members Kalantari Johnson, Watkins, Myers voting against, and council members Cummings, Brown, and Brunner voting for. So we do have a motion on the floor to accept the ordinance as with the noted annotations or noted that were presented by staff. And if there's not any additional council discussion, I see Lee has got some of these sections that we have just been edited. If there's no further questions or comments by council, then we will. Okay, Lee, do you have all of those up so we can see them? Looks like you do.
Actually, Bonnie is sharing her screen and has those up.
Okay.
I wanted to clarify one thing, and that is, so actually, Bonnie, maybe if I could share my screen for a second so I can find it a little more easily. Thank you. Mayor, you had, and let me make this larger so you can see it better. This is the version with the changes, and you had suggested that this language in 040 include under 2 here.
Right.
Sleeping facility shall not be located in or adjacent. There are other places down here where you may want to consider adding that. This was what we had suggested here. Facilities noted in this section shall not be located. You may want to consider adding in or at this location as well for consistency. And then you suggested, one of the council members suggested that this be added to C as well. Facilities in this shall not be located. And presumably the approach is to also say in or. Mm-hmm. And I just want to, so I wanted to clarify that. I also just wanted to note that for C here, this as a nonprofit, so the potential here for, say, like a church to have a couple of pallet shelters, if that church is located in a residential area, that would be precluded by this addition. And so I want to just put that out there for the council. It's a policy decision. When the council provide us the direction to not have the city-owned or operated properties or facilities. That's where we had specified not in residential or not adjacent to residential schools. This one would preclude those types of facilities run by a nonprofit. So, there could be some limitations on creativity, but it's entirely a policy decision as to whether or not the council wants to do that. And I don't know whether a church would be interested in hosting, a handful of tents or pallet shelters on an interior portion of their property, for example. That may or may not be something that they would be interested in doing. But that was one of the things that we had thought about in not including that here. And the last thing I'll say is that we did say as part of prior staff reports that we would come back to the council with operational policies related to this section. So I can leave this up. I think we need two things. One is, we really need one thing is, do you want the in or in these other two sections, which presumably so, and then I just wanted to call that the policy implication out to your attention.
I think, at least from my request of the motion maker and Councilmember Kalantari Johnson, mine was focused on the D, and I believe the Mr. Brown suggested that addition to C, but I wasn't completely sure. He mentioned that, but I can see the conflict in C. So I'll leave it to the motion maker in terms of that. And I believe she's taking a look at it right now.
Yeah. Can you repeat, Lee? Could you repeat the conflict in C? I'm trying to.
Sure. It's not a conflict. This you could implement. It's fine. I just wanted to call out for the council so that they understand, where this without this section. Without let me highlight. Let me be clear. Without this section, a church, for example, could say, I want to I want to put up 2 pallet shelters on an interior courtyard of my property.
Oh, I see.
And if that church was located in or adjacent to a residential neighborhood, which many churches are, they would not be able to do that with this.
I see. Yeah, I wouldn't want to include that then.
I would just point out that C also refers to managed encampments as authorized by the city manager or city council, whereas subsection D is a little bit less structured.
Okay. Got it. Okay, let's strike that then. Let's take it back out.
Sorry, which part?
Yeah, the red text under C. I wouldn't want to exclude churches from doing something like that.
It's 050C, Bonnie.
What's highlighted on the screen right now?
So we're just not including the in or we're including the red minus?
We're taking out the whole red part.
The whole red. So we're not editing that section at all.
That's correct. Because my understanding is that an instant could be that church then couldn't stand this up, and I wouldn't want to exclude that. Thank you for that, Lee.
Of course, yeah. I mean, there are policy considerations on either side. The neighbors expressed concerns about this, and the council reacted and said, let's preclude from residential and schools. This, I think, if it were implemented, would have to be done so in a careful manner so that it isn't creating impacts to the surrounding community. But I do think that that we may get some creative responses, and every bit can help. And so if a church wanted to do something like that would have impact, having that opportunity, I think, is something that we wouldn't necessarily want to preclude. So just wanted to put that out there.
And I think, Lee, your point earlier, which is that, the city will be developing sort of prescriptions in terms around operations and some of that. So, if this situation did arise, that activity would actually be permitted. And part of that permitting would be, typical operational requirements, et cetera, correct?
Absolutely. And we would certainly have in any authorizations that we issue, revocation provisions, so that if there are any acts that aren't being addressed, that we would have the ability to revoke that permit.
Thank you.
And again, we would be coming back to the council with some of those operational considerations, so that the council can say, yes, no, these are the kind of things, have to have access to sanitation facilities. How are you dealing with complaints, and who do people call, those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we still have the original motion on the floor. We've clarified the adjustments to the language. Councilmember Cummings, do you have questions or comments?
I'd just like to make final comments, and I just want to, again, express my appreciation for the work that's gone into this. I'm not going to be supporting the motion on the floor. I think that at the last time this was heard, there was a large contingency of people from the community who came out, and given that there's still time before any of this would be implemented, I feel like there's also opportunities to, take what we have before us and have more community engagement. That is what was clearly expressed the last time we had something come before us, was that the community felt like we were trying to do this quickly and we weren't trying to get as much input, and they really were expressing wanting to be included in the process. And the people who, came to this meeting weren't just the homeless activists. It's many members of the community who want to see something like this happen. And I think we all really want to see how we can strike the balance. And so, I'm encouraged to see how this is going to turn out. I'm very supportive of safe sleeping sites. I'm very supportive of the storage programs. We've been able to make them work in the community. I think that we can make them work again. But I do believe that, when we're creating laws that are going to impact people's lives, that we really, especially when it comes to probably one of the most controversial topics in our community, that we really need to do our best to have as much as possible. And then I'll just end by saying, there was a comment, and I'm not prepared to make any suggestions, but I do know that there was a member of the public who made a comment around qualified disabilities and people needing to provide doctor's notes. And that pretty problematic. I think the way that it's stated currently, many homeless people don't have access to doctors. And so, for them to obtain a doctor's note and money to pay for a doctor, could be, prohibitive, and they might not be able to do it. So that's just one thing I'd like to point out that is probably a very big concern that hopefully be addressed before this is voted on. And I'll just leave my comments there, and thank you all again for your time and for taking my comments and the community's comments and all of our work into consideration.
Thank you, Council Member. I have Vice Mayor Bruner next.
Thank you. I had some comments, and we were surprised with the substitute motion. So now I have comments and a friendly amendment I'd like to propose at this point. So I think it's, all of this discussion has been really valuable in all of us getting around this. And I know this discussion has been going on since the 2017 homeless report and the cash work. So much work and public input has gone into that. However, with that substitute motion that was presented, there was a piece that I think is very valuable. I think the added time for public input was good. And I'm wondering if the maker of the motion would be willing to have a friendly amendment for that added public input. Even though we feel that we've received so much input already, this is a new draft proposal, and while we expect to have it on a Thursday and ready by a Tuesday, the public doesn't always have that option or the opportunity. And I know the process for 2 readings, but I'm wondering if that added public input is valuable. The second friendly amendment would be to address the invisible disability that was brought up. And so I'd like to, give staff direction to address that doctor's note piece. I think is very important. We have invisible disabilities. I would just hate for that to be not addressed. I think that's vital. This ordinance has many great components: the safe sleeping sites, the daytime storage, collaboration and access to county health services, human services, housing services. There was a caller who called in about the $4 million the city has spent and where has that gone. And I just want to applaud so much of, I know the efforts are almost invisible. The $4 million I know has gone into a lot of prevention and programs, security deposit, rent payments, and Housing Matters, support to encompass community services. There's so much that the city is addressing and continuing to support, and I want to just acknowledge all of that, and all of those components are still happening. This ordinance is not to solve the whole thing, that all the needs that are needed. There were a lot of callers tonight that kept emphasizing 150 safe sleeping sites is not enough. And no, it's not. Nobody is saying it is, but it's something. And it's a minimum. We hope to have more. We hope to keep that in context of the county also working on shelter sites. Doesn't necessarily have to be within the city. All of us working together to address the pieces that are needed. It's not one solution. We have many solutions needed in this big structural issue that is in our community. And we have a lot of affordable housing. Since November, I think, of 2020, we've approved and the construction of so much affordable housing, which includes transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, low-income housing. We need to and again, that speaks to the prevention component. So all of those pieces are happening. So I just hope that message is heard and understood by the community when those feel that this is not enough. It isn't enough, and it's a piece of all the other pieces. And so those are my comments, and then I'll bring it back to the friendly amendment and ask the maker of the motion.
Okay. So we have a friendly amendment. I believe Vice Mayor, it was to address the invisible disability piece. Yes, and the public input time. I'll ask the make the motion.
Mayor, sorry, if I can just confirm, Vice Mayor, can you specify the wording on the disability? Are you wanting them to look into the requirement for a doctor's note, or?
Yes, the part, I don't have the number in front of me if someone could bring that up, but where that would fall under, if we can get language. There it is. Oh. Just making sure that any invisible disabilities,
040D.
040D. Let me pull it up in front of me. There it is.
So are you wanting to edit the ordinance, or are you wanting them to bring back information on it?
I am, hold on, give me 1 second to look at this so I can direct you. I am wanting to edit that physician's verification to the ordinance. Because it's speaking to the disability that's not apparent to city staff.
So specifically, what are we changing that sentence to? Just delete the fact that they may ask?
So I think you probably want to take a look at qualifying disability definition.
Phrase.
In 020, it means a physical or mental disability that prevents a person from being able to, on a daily basis, deconstruct and put away an encampment.
Yes, but the wording in there that to provide patient verification.
It's actually section D. It's 3D. I think it's the language, Vice Mayor. At the very end of that sentence, it says a person who claims to have a qualifying disability that is not reasonably apparent to city staff may be asked to present a physician's verification of a qualifying disability. Is that the language?
Yes. Does that need to be in there?
I guess my question would be, I don't know how, I just don't know how police would, or I just don't know how anybody making contact would be able to, maybe Tony, you can speak to that, or Lee.
I would say that my thoughts on it are that this, I think, this statement was arguably more, carried more weight with the prior version of the ordinance. And that's because earlier versions of the ordinance, recall, had allowances for individuals who could not unpack or pack their belongings to remain in place for 72 hours. And the attorneys have worked, and we've had some conversations back and forth, and I think we've tried to do a lot to address this issue of individuals with qualified disabilities in terms of now providing reasonable assistance. And so that's really what this is related to now, is if there's an individual who has a qualifying disability and they're not able to pack up, that reasonable assistance would be provided to them. That's a very different scenario than being able to remain in place for, I think it was 4 days that they could stay in place. So the implications of taking this out are less now than they were before. There still could be abuse of this, sure. But I don't think that of its removal are as much as they would have been in prior versions of the ordinance. I don't know, Tony, you want to?
I would tend to agree. I don't think it would substantially affect how the ordinance is implemented if we were to delete that sentence as suggested by Vice Mayor Brunner.
Yeah, the challenge would be, is there a safe sleeping location where someone says, I'm unable to pack up my tent, and so I need assistance doing it on a regular basis. And, that's the flip side is, someone could then abuse that scenario, frankly. And so there's pro and con to it.
Yeah, I just don't, I would like to see that the physician not be a requirement and that someone would not be in violation of this ordinance because they don't have that.
Is there discretion in the way that that's written, in that the word may is operative there?
Yes, it was intentionally written that way so that, a person in the field could make a common sense determination about whether or not a person had appeared to or exhibited the qualities of having a disability. And I would just add a disability that would render the person unable to relocate their belongings such that they would need assistance from city staff to do so.
I guess I would ask the maker of the motion if I believe it's a proposal that be struck.
Given, I think, what I heard from staff, if I am not following or tracking exactly what is being said, is that if that were struck, then it doesn't substantively change that component of the ordinance because it's already sort of covered under the other language. Find it. Which talks about reasonable assistance available. Is that accurate?
Somewhat. The issue here would be that, if someone is capable of doing that, but is not inclined to do so, then under the ordinance, if this section were not there, and they could say, I need assistance every day, which can result in staff time in assisting that individual. So that's where I think, as Attorney Condati was saying, this provides some discretion for the city. So if someone's seen, if someone's biking and running around at one point, and then an hour later they say, hey, I can't pack this up. Absent this, I think we would be mandated to assist them in packing up their belongings.
Again, that's a visible example that you brought up.
Yeah, true.
And they may or may not have a physician's verification It's still in the ordinance here for assistance, and there may be someone who will need daily assistance. But the physician's verification should be irrelevant.
Maker of the motion.
No, I'm just trying to, I don't know if the seconder wants to add. I mean, I'm comfortable because I feel like to a certain extent we could take that out and then see how it goes. And if there is a feeling it's not working as written, then we could bring back a potential for an amendment. But I'm also concerned that if we do it based on individuals' words or kind of misuse potentially, then are we not necessarily going to have an effective approach? So, I mean, I welcome the seconder if they have any additional comments around.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I hear your concerns, Vice Mayor Brunner. It seems like the word may, as Tony mentioned, gives the discretion. I don't know. It seems like the word may there gives us the discretion to not require a verification. I am also concerned of this being misused if it's taken out. So that's my concern there. And then I did have a comment about the engagement, but we'll wait till this piece is community engagement. We'll wait till this piece is resolved.
So the may word, let's say they don't have, or so then what happens? They're in violation, correct?
They wouldn't be in violation, required to pack up their belongings themselves, and they would have the opportunity to go to, if they needed a physician's verification, they could go to, for example, the HPHP offices at Housing Matters and get a physician's verification there if they needed that.
Can I add to that? Typically staff will work really hard with individuals to provide them, to refer them to assistance through the outreach workers. We have the outreach workers, obviously, as you're familiar with, and they'll connect them to services. And the spirit of the ordinance is to give everyone every opportunity to access services, including medical services, which are available at Housing Matters, for example, at the there. And so those referrals will happen. I think the concern here really is that it would be an extreme example of somebody that was really trying to abuse this potential. And that would really be the concern. And that would be an extreme situation. I think for the most part, staff doesn't run to enforcement until it's an extreme situation where somebody really is trying to. And I think it'd be helpful to have a tool to be able to address those extreme situations when they come up. And if they don't, we can always report back, and if it becomes an issue, I suppose. But I think that's the concern, that there'll be abuse and it'll be a loophole that people will take advantage of.
So if staff has the option to ask for a physician's verification as it's currently written, and if they don't have that, staff can want to assist. Is that what's being implied?
No. Well, go ahead.
So if we would generally be assisting, and if there is a instance where we have reason to believe that a staff member has reason to believe the person is capable, they could say, hey, can you get verification for this?
And again, it goes back to the invisible disability, like for staff to determine something like that. And they may not have a physician's verification, but they will, I think, is the greater concern than the possibility of abusing that.
I wonder if I could offer a suggestion, Mayor.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor, I wonder if we could say that if they may be asked to present a physician's verification of disability and be open to receiving assistance in regards to movement, and that it kind of covers that they'll still be open to receiving the assistance, but not necessarily not being able to provide the verification. Do you see this a little bit?
Yeah, I just don't want the lack of physician's verification to be an obstacle to receiving assistance. I don't think that,
or we could just explicitly state that the lack of physician's verification cannot be an obstacle to receiving assistance or something like that, potentially. How would that substantively change the ordinance? Because I see you're looking for a safeguard in that regard, and I don't know if that could. How would that? I don't know what that would look like.
I think that would, if that's not, well, I think it would essentially amount to the deletion of that section. Just as an option, they could. You could have staff track and report on how many times we actually request that.
That was my other thought, that if we or try to see how it works and then have verification or an assessment of when it occurs and then review those cases potentially as needed or something like that to ensure that it's not an unintended consequence for this population, potentially. That could maybe, I don't know, be somewhat of a tool that we could use, but I'm open to other suggestions. I'm just trying to see how we can kind of get kind of agreement on what I think is the intention around that.
Yeah. Can you say that one more time so I understand what you're suggesting?
That essentially we would, given that we're going to have sort of data collected and sort of a review of how this is working so that we can make changes, that we would ask our staff to identify these situations when they may have to ask an individual to present a physician's verification of a qualifying disability in those circumstances, and then review those to see if it's an impediment to population and or if if it works, and then just change the language essentially as needed and adapt and kind of refine, right? That's kind of the hope, I think, with a lot of this, is that we constantly learn and refine, but not completely change it substantively.
We get feedback from police or others, race workers, service providers, collect that data and then refine as needed versus making the revision tonight, the suggested revision tonight. Vice Mayor?
I agree with the revisions, and refining that we will, but it brings me back to simply deleting that last sentence and tracking to refine and revision in the future is the simpler way without changing it substantively.
Which way does the motion maker, which way would you like to delete the sentence and then assess via data that there is potentially folks not, potentially kind of evaluating how that's working in the field, or do you want to keep it in and evaluate on the backside?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe since I see a number of my colleagues with their hands up, I'd like to hear what some other people might have to add, but I'm open to that.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I mean, obviously there are competing concerns here. One is Vice Mayor Bruner's very legitimate concern that people, such as the the person who is receiving chemotherapy or has a heart condition or something of that nature that is truly a qualifying disability but is not readily observable will not be burdened unreasonably by this requirement. On the other hand, I think it is fair to say that a significant number of people that the staff encounters on a daily basis in large encampments are not in every instance credible when someone might assert that they have a disability. And so really the intent here is to give staff reasonable tools to deal with the person, as Lee suggested, who's riding a bicycle or shooting baskets or doing something of that nature, but they can't fold up their tent. And so I have some alternative language that I could share that is my attempt to address that.
I will call on other. I have a suggestion for Vice Mayor Bruder. Physician, maybe directly not identifying physician, but maybe there's also another category of a clinical advocate or a case manager. So someone under the care.
That could be an option. I know, working with the and the mental health liaisons that oftentimes there are certain individuals, they are familiar with their cases.
So maybe there's
with their situations, with their needs, and have been working with those individuals, and may know their story and their struggle, their qualifying disability.
So maybe extending those types of categorizations of folks that may be able to provide some verification if it is an invisible disability, maybe just by extending some of those other service providers that may have knowledge of the person with that.
Yes, it's in the right direction. However, in the moment when you have to, what if no one's there to verify that, or, that you wouldn't receive assistance? It's a burden on the individual when already we have to look at the burden.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it out for other council members. So right now, I think we're trying to remedy this language, this particular language. I think there's also a motion for a substitute, or a friendly amendment to add some public hearings. I'll call on Councilmember Brown and then Councilmember Co0uncil. Councilmember Brown, are you planning to address this particular change in the ordinance that we're working on?
No, I'm not. I raised my hand quite a while ago just to make one comment. I can wait until you're done with this.
Thank you. Councilmember Co0uncil, did you have a comment on this particular item or on the public hearing piece?
I had a comment about the public hearings, but it seems like this specific item isn't resolved, so I can wait. I will just comment that adding clinical advocate or case managers, I think really gets to what Vice Mayor Brenner is trying to move us towards, and then the other suggestion that Councilmember Watkins brought up, that we come back and look at how this is being implemented. If I like that suggestion and would recommend staff to direct staff to add that as one of the indicators that we would be tracking, because we had a list of indicators. So not an indicator, but one of the specific items that we'd be tracking. Yeah.
I'll go to Councilmember Golder. Do you have language on this particular one?
Well, I think that everyone's good intentions here. I just want to everybody, and people have brought it up already, but I think when someone's being contacted to clean up and they're saying, I have a disability, I would hope that whoever was helping them would help them that first time and direct them to the HPHP where they can have walk-in physicians care, and so I guess I would hope that whoever was contacting them to clean up would take into consideration, if they didn't know the person, that direct them towards where they can get a physician's verification, and with that, some assistance for whatever their disability, whether visible or invisible, is. And so that's kind of what, and I also was wanting us to just look at, put this in and reevaluate, are people taking advantage of the if it is a loophole that people are worried about or whatever, like, I don't know. Let's put away. Sorry.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking.
Councilmember Cummings, did you want to speak to this item?
I just had, because a couple things came up, and I do think that, case managers and other people providing notes probably sounds like a good compromise. I do want to ask, and I don't know if Susie is available or somebody who's, or if anybody on the staff can answer this question. But I think there's an assumption that we have, which is that, people who are experiencing homelessness can kind of just walk in to HPHP and get an appointment and get a doctor's note and walk out the door. And it's not that easy to get a doctor's note, especially when you're experiencing homelessness. And so it would be great to hear from staff, what the reality is around getting those notes. And then also, I think there's also an assumption that everyone experiencing homelessness has a case manager, and many people haven't been connected to services. And I think it's, really critical if somebody, has a disability and encountered camping in unsanctioned areas, what's the opportunity for us and the potential for us to connect them to case managers? Because ultimately that's what we want to do, right? We want to get people connected to services. And so I guess that's just a concern I have, is that, that we're working on a couple assumptions here, and I'd like to get, we can get a reality check around, how people can see doctors and how we can connect people to case management and case workers.
I do. Councilmember, I just took a tour there less than a year ago, and I asked that, and they said there's a walk-in clinic and that you could get same-day services if you need, and that you could make appointments. That's what I was told. So yes, assumption.
I see Susie O'Hara has come on.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just confirming that Director Butler would like me to weigh in. I'm happy to do that if so.
Go for it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember, for the prompt. And I just want to express just some empathy around how challenging the subject is. Generally speaking, HPHP does have walk-in hours Monday through Friday. Getting a qualifying disability physician's assessment is not going to be a drop-in situation. However, everybody who walks in does have access to clinical support. And so what I would say about the invisible disability, or if there is an interaction with law enforcement or an outreach worker on whether somebody has a qualifying disability, it seems as if what council is trying to do is say, under no circumstances should first contact under this subsection be, lead to enforcement. And I think, staff should have some potential to evaluate whether their conversation is happening with transparency and honesty. And I think multiple interactions will allow for that. I do think with a first interaction under this subsection, it would be really hard to assess how best to move forward. And so I do think that having that caveat might be helpful and alleviate some of this challenge. And then secondarily, I think as Vice Mayor Bruner mentioned, while not everybody has a case manager necessarily, most folks that are on, have a disability or on SSI do have clinical support at the Homeless Persons Health Project or at the clinic at Emmeline. So I think in large it's going to be a very small fraction of folks that might fall into this loophole. And I do think the intention is to have repeated contacts and making sure that we're not, disrupting and or further challenging somebody who just simply cannot meet the expectations of this particular subsection.
Okay. So I see language up. The language on the left side, is that from Lee, or it looks like we're trying to get to this qualifying disability that city staff reasonably believes, based on objective factors that shall be documented, may be asked to present physicians, and then we could add clinical. We could add that language. Just trying to.
I provided that language, and I'm realizing it's an incomplete thought. So
I was wondering where that came from.
So we can take that down, and if I finish my thought, I will try to put something back up.
Okay. Susie, I think your suggestion about no first contact interaction shall result in enforcement of this subsection might be the key to what Vice Mayor Brunner is trying to achieve. So maybe in that language, Tony, is that correct? Vice Mayor Brunner, does that sort of address your concern?
It just seems simpler to delete that sentence. A person who claims to have a qualifying disability that is not reasonably apparent to city staff may be asked to present a physician's verification of the qualifying disability. Like, it doesn't serve a purpose enough to have it in there.
The maker of the motion, are you? I think we're stuck. So someone's got to move somewhere. And I think we could debate this language for a while, but I think there's also that assessment on the backside that could be done if this does arise based on all the context that there's language that maybe needs to be brought back in. But we've been talking one for almost an hour now, so I think we need to. Someone's got to accept something. So
sure.
If the maker of the motion might be willing to potentially agree to remove that with, and then hopefully with the data collected in the field, we could find out if that needs to be re-put back in at some point. I think that might be the fastest thing to do at this point.
I alternative language up here, but I would tend to agree with the comment that the mayor just made.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I mean, and I hear the concerns and considerations around it. So obviously we'll want to look at it and track it. But if that is the consensus of where we're at this point, then I'm fine with removing that language.
Whoever's screen is up is we're seeing your house.
If the seconder also is.
Is the seconder amenable to that?
Yeah, that's fine as long as we track it, because it does seem like there was a purpose to it. So let's just make sure we track that.
Okay, so we will strike that sentence. I think before we move into the public hearing piece, which was a suggestion around process, if the maker of the motion might be amenable, I'd like to revisit the section that we just discussed earlier, which was 6.36.050. Let's see, it is item C, which we had struck all of the language regarding the statement of categorizing the facilities and whether or not they could be adjacent to residential neighborhoods or schools. So this is the language in this section is at events or in a manner that is authorized by the city council or city manager, such as managing encampments and or managed safe sleeping zones for overnight tent encampments, which may be managed by the city, the county, or an approved nonprofit. These may be authorized on any public or private property in any zoning district and in areas that would otherwise prohibit such uses. We had a suggestion that facilities noted in this subsection shall not be located adjacent to residential neighborhoods or schools. If there was one comment that was very clear in all of the dialogue we had a couple of meetings ago, it was frankly the concern that that residential neighborhoods or schools could potentially be impacted by these facilities. So I'm wondering if the maker of the motion, I'm wondering if a way to go about this would be to add back in that language where we say facilities noted in this subsection with the exception of neighborhood churches or churches shall be located adjacent. Because I think what we were really working on was trying to make sure that if a church in a residential area was going to potentially be a site for this, we would be able to accommodate that. But I think deleting it altogether, I think we get people who are also weighing in on the side of saying we support facilities, we just don't want to see them adjacent to our neighborhoods or adjacent to our schools. Whether that's right or wrong, or you agree with that or not, I'm just trying to figure out a way to acknowledge that churches may play that role, but I would like to ask the maker of the motion to see if we could put that language back in, which would be, so the facilities noted in this subsection with the exception of churches shall not be located adjacent to the residential neighborhoods or schools.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. And a seconder?
Yes, and I have a question. I know some communities have had schools who put up shelters, either in cases of emergency or, in cases of emergency. So would adding that preclude us to have schools step in cases of emergency? Otherwise, I am okay with it.
I would say as written, it would. I'll share my screen because sometimes it's easier to actually read. So I've gone back to this section C and facilities noted in the subsection with the exception of churches. And actually we should say religious assembly uses, may not be a church.
So what if we had school-sponsored programs? Like if a school wanted to do something, facilities noted in the section with the exception of religious assembly uses or school-sponsored programs. Mayor, would that work?
Yeah. So are you for a school maybe that potentially had one or two safe sleeping, maybe a few things for a student if we were found that was needed or a student was, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm thinking of recently Cabrillo College put up trailers for the TAY Transition Age Youth Program as a shelter-in-place site. So that's a college, but I think there are those instances. So we don't want to use language that would exclude school programs that want to do something like this.
Okay, I'm fine with that. So the maker of the motion is okay with that language. Seconder is okay with that language.
Yep.
Okay. Vice Mayor Bruner had one other requested change to the motion or friendly amendment, and that was to include 2 additional public hearings. So I'd like to provide an opportunity for the motion maker to respond to that request.
And I wanted to see and get clarification in regards to some of the outreach strategies that I think I heard or kind of were identified, but I don't have offhand specifically.
Sure. So a few things that we're planning on doing coming up in the near future. One, we will be engaging some of the technical experts in the field, people who have experience either operating or residing in these types of facilities to help us better gauge the responses that we're getting to the RFQ, and potentially even, to put an addendum out to the RFQ if there are things that warrant revisions to that. And then we'd be doing site-specific neighborhood outreach. So anytime we're contemplating one of these locations, out to people in the immediate vicinity to engage with them, understand their concerns, see how we can adapt the proposed facility to address those concerns. And then we've got a webinar coming up next week that is a broader webinar about the services that the city provides. And then we'd be doing the risk-specific webinar for those who are looking at providing the services that we're requesting in the RFQ. So that's the current slate that we have planned in the next few weeks.
Thank you. I guess if I could get clarification of what the 2 additional public outreach efforts look like beyond what was identified by staff already. So just so I'm clear on what that translates to.
I think for my intention and how I see it is I have received comments that it's difficult to have time to really go through this type of ordinance from a Thursday to a Tuesday and have for the public to feel that they are part of giving the input, and not everybody has opportunity to do it within that time. Not everybody has opportunity to be on this call. So just giving extra time for that input so that our constituents can feel that they've had a chance to weigh in. And I understand email, we sure get a lot of emails, and that is another option. But really, with everything forward, and there is no immediate next week time frame and that we need to adhere to, I think it would be a very appreciated thing to do to allow that extra time. And, 2 public hearings, 1 public hearing, even that would be, I think, really important.
If I may jump in as a seconder of the motion, Vice Mayor Brunner, is this, are you suggesting in addition to the webinar that is taking place next week, something that looks different than that?
I think so.
Okay. And the other comment I wanted to make is that I've also seen a number of emails that have indicated that there has been public outreach and engagement, and there has been opportunities to voice input on what this ordinance should and shouldn't look like. So I've also received a number of those emails. So I would just say, to me, it seems like what staff has laid out in terms of engagement through the RFQ process, through the webinar, through direct outreach to service providers, feels like we cover our bases. But I hear what you're saying, and I hear what Councilmember Cummings has brought up as well. I think as long as it doesn't keep us from moving forward with the programming that we have in motion, with the safe sleeping, with the storage, with the transitional shelter, I just don't want those programming pieces to be delayed. So as long as we can, if staff has the capacity to do public hearings while we're moving forward with programming, I would be okay with that.
Programming, yeah. Go ahead, Mayor Myers.
I'm going to call on Bonnie Bush. Bonnie, do you need to tell us something?
No, I'm hoping to be able to go section by section on what I've captured so far.
Okay.
Before we take the vote.
Okay. I I have Councilmember Brown. I'm not sure if you, and then I have Councilmember Cummings. I'll just make a comment. I'm not supportive of additional public hearings because the main, I'm really hoping we'll obviously go through a second reading in 2 weeks. And then we're trying to operationalize this. I don't agree that this is going to go on forever. I think very likely we'll be in the yellow tier very soon. I've heard really, really loud and clear, and I've literally talked to hundreds of people, many of them in person. Our community is really ready for this, and to keep saying we need to do more public discussion or have more public hearings. I think we're just sort of starting to lose traction on really, frankly, the severity of the conditions that people who find themselves in these encampments are experiencing. And this ordinance provides us a way to provide services, and it provides us a way to make contact with folks. And I've seen our police officers and other fields provide very good care and thoughtful care for people who are trying to, even if we're trying to move them along or move them to another location or get them into a hotel. I just feel like having another public hearing is kicking the can down the road. We have a severe and acute issue with encampments. They are not good places for people to be. There's a lot of things that go on in them that we need to acknowledge. This provides a huge amount of service level that is tied to having an ordinance in place. Putting the programs up without an ordinance in place doesn't really make any sense because it's not going to address the acute issue of encampments. And that, again, if we go back to our goal, at least for this one part of our homelessness management, that is one of the established goals or stated goals of the ordinance. So that's just my opinion, is that, we've had at least 5, we'll have 6 hearings. Yes, they're formal regarding the ordinance language, but each time we've made changes. And I think we need to decide whether to adopt the ordinance and move on and get into a programmatic mode on this rather than continue to have more hearings. That's just my thought. I'll acknowledge Councilmember Reddy, then Councilmember Cummings, and then Councilmember Golder.
I am. Mayor, if I may, in response to the comment you just made, I hear you and I understand the urgency, and I just want to point out that I too understand the emergency, and I also believe that the way to address that is with the programmatic stuff. And I don't think we need a camping ban to give us the political will to develop this kind of programming. Unfortunately, that's what's happened. Here we are. The comment that I was going to make, though, was why I had my hand up was related to churches. And I just wanted to say I was surprised to hear that staff is not aware of churches who would be interested in this because they, as far as I can tell, have been begging us for years to have more of a role. And so, I would really encourage you to get in touch with them if you haven't, because I think that you will find there is an interest there, and it's in some cases a resource question, but they do have lots of volunteers as well. So it's a resource question, a more cost-effective answer. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Mayor. And I just also wanted to comment that, as we mentioned before, I know that we've had a number of these meetings, but, we started this back in February, and I know even the council kind of rushed to put something on the books. And as a result of that, many people in the community felt like they weren't aware of what was happening. And when they became aware, were pretty upset with the direction we were going in. And as a result, we're back here today. And although I do understand that there's an urgency to the establishment of encampments, but one of the things that's been pointed out and this is, for the community to take into consideration, is the fact that, there is still time. The RFQ hasn't been issued yet and hasn't been finalized. And so between the time when we finalize that, when we get the proposals back until a decision is made, and then a time for rollout is actually established, that's likely going to be another month and a half to 2 months. And so, there is time. It's May 11th. We could have outreach occur between now and the first meeting in June. We could have the first reading at the first meeting in June and the second reading at the second meeting in June, and that would still provide us with time to roll everything out, especially because we don't have an identified provider yet. And we haven't identified, costs or any of these other things that are really important and critical for us to get these services up and running. And so I do understand the urgency, but I think that, one of the things that I'm hoping that comes out of trying to have more of these conversations is that we can rebuild trust with many members of the community who don't feel like they can trust us right now. And that's because we received, close to 1,500 emails regarding the TOLO and people not wanting to have the TOLO move forward at not the last meeting, but the one before. And so, I just keep recommending that we have this opportunity to have further engagement with the community, because that's what the community is asking us for. And it would go a long way to rebuild trust and let them know that we are trying to hear them out. And so I've been advocating for this for months now, and I'm going to continue to advocate and support the Vice Mayor's recommendation. So I'm hoping we can, move forward and figure out a good path to make sure that we're having inclusive and transparent conversations with the community around this topic.
I will go ahead. I think I'll respond if that's okay. Again, I'm just wanting to make clear, there has been extensive outreach. There's been extensive opportunity for people to engage in this. We've had extensive planning processes. We're writing a law, which by nature is a public process, includes public comment. It provides us the time to be able to make changes. We're doing those again tonight. And I don't think that, because we have an RFQ that's going to go out in a week, and then maybe it's, again, we have to set the policy. Without the policy, doing all of those things, while it would be good to do all of those things, we also have to bring the policy in alignment with some of the goals that our community as a whole is expressing. And our community as a whole is expressing that they would like us to have a managed approach to homelessness. And this policy is providing a managed approach to homelessness. It's not criminalizing homelessness. It is providing a managed approach to homelessness. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, in that it does provide the policy that then builds the programmatic pieces that put the policy on the ground. If we continue to just sort of talk about, sort of the need for more people, we're just kicking the policy down the road. And I guess I just end by really stating what I stated at the beginning tonight is that, I attended a statewide conference last week on homeless encampments. That was specific to looking at the environmental damages associated, and this with, a lot of practitioners that work on water quality and environmental protection and things like that. Everyone in that conference was very compassionate about this tragedy that's happening in California. But everyone was also acknowledging that this is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for our environment. It's unsustainable for the people in these encampments. It is a state responsibility. It is a national responsibility. And I think with the governor's announcement today that he specifically is offering local governments $50 million to address encampments, that is a signal that our management policy that we're crafting right now is in alignment with what the opportunities will be to bring resources to the folks who are in these encampments and that need to get into services and need to, frankly, get into housing. Talking about it for another month or two is not going to help. In fact, if we have this on the books, when we go to look to write this grant, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we can say, yes, we have an ordinance on the books. We have our management policy on the books. It's not perfect. We're going to keep collecting data. We're going to keep engaging with our community. We're going to get regular updates from our staff. But I can guarantee you we're going to be a lot more competitive for that $50 million than if we don't have this policy on the books. So that's my pitch tonight. I get to do that. So that's my pitch tonight. Let's not just keep kicking this down the road. We need to get ready. We need to get ready for this money, and we need to take it seriously. We need to be ready as a community. I'm tired of talking and not doing anything. We've got to get assistance for the people who need it here in this community. I'm done talking about it. Okay, Councilmember Golder.
You pretty much summed up everything I was going to say, but I just any grant opportunities that could be forthcoming, and so I don't want to delay for that reason. I see that urgency.
Okay, what do we got here? We have Councilmember Watkins. The mayor.
I agree. I appreciate your comments, and my colleagues, and I think we all share a real commitment to wanting to see movement here and wanting to see things improved and our community healthier. And frankly, we want to see us being poised to receive the resources we need. And that requires us to be bold and take action and to be educated action and do the for refinement. And I think, Mayor, you spoke to this point. So we don't have to talk about it anymore.
We don't, and I just want to say, as the friendly amendment maker, suggester, I was really referring specifically to this draft. I don't disagree with the points of moving this forward. It's, the courtesy of this draft and giving people the opportunity to sit with this draft and to go through it and to understand it and to give perspective that we may not see because we only have our perspectives as 7 people. And so the community as a whole has a much wider perspective that is valuable. As we've seen, all of their input thus far in all the previous drafts have helped form this current version. It's pretty amazing the process we've gotten to at this point with this. So that was all. I was really just, if it was until next council meeting, just having that draft out there and having people have that opportunity to have it more equitable. So
I wonder if between this first reading and the second reading, our communications person can help with getting it out there and that we encourage their input and feedback on this draft before we make a final decision before the second reading would be sufficient to what I think the intention we all share is.
We could do that. We could definitely.
That would be great.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay, great. So with that, maybe we can kind of reach a compromise in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So it sounds like that friendly amendment will hopefully be honored with, some really focused communication and outreach. So I think I'd like to go ahead and finalize and get our vote underway tonight. Councilmember Cummings, do you have another question?
I just wanted to see if we could get a clarification on what the motion is before us, since it sounds like the friendly amendment might have changed, and so I just want to make sure that that the motion's clear that's before us.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Bonnie to bring that up so we could see it before we vote. Okay, Bonnie, you want to put that up and ask the maker to make sure we captured everything on these language changes. Okay.
Is it up or no? My Zoom is.
I see it, yeah.
Okay.
It's not in red anymore. It looks like you're mostly noting it in underline, right, Bonnie?
That's right.
Okay. So the motion would be to basically just grab my sheets here. So this would be a motion to consider introducing for publication an ordinance amending Chapter 6.36 of the Santa Cruz Municipal Code relating to camping services and standards with the following revisions as noted in these sections. Bonnie, do you feel like I need to read these off?
I would like to just ask for clarification on one.
Sure. Go ahead, Tony.
040D, my recollection was that the council, that the friendly amendment was to strike the last sentence of this. This is some alternative language that I was toying with, but I thought the friendly amendment was to strike it.
Yeah, you're correct. All the way to a person, Bonnie, goes all the way to that. That entire section gets struck.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
The amendments are going to include 6.36.040A2, the addition of the words located in or adjacent to residential neighborhoods or schools.
I do have a question about that. Sorry.
What was that?
I do have a question about that. The edit you've made here, down below, is that
does not capture it.
It's not part of this. It's not part of all the adjacent sections, right?
Let me just look.
I think, Bonnie, I think you need to add the in or to the O4OC below. Keep going down.
Where?
Keep going down, yeah.
Sorry, 050.
Yeah.
So shall not be located in or adjacent to.
So the other parts, though, do I need to add with the exception of churches or not?
Bonnie's question.
Oh, sorry. You do not need to add that there.
No.
That is related to city owned or operated properties or facilities, and we're not operating religious assembly uses, so we should be.
Okay.
Thank you for checking.
Yeah, thanks for checking on that, Bonnie.
Bonnie, can you scroll back down to 050C, please? With some language about school.
Yeah, I think we put in, with the exception of churches and
religious assembly.
Yeah.
Instead of churches.
So wait, how should I put this? Churches.
With the exception of religious assembly uses and
school-sponsored programs.
School-sponsored, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And churches goes away, Bonnie. There we go. And that would be the same down below in the yellow. That looks right.
We actually do not need that exception in that section. This OD is also referring to city-owned or city-operated properties.
So that would just say facilities in this section shall not be located in or adjacent. Right, exactly. Thanks, Lee, for catching that.
Yep. You can get rid of the safe sleeping there.
Right.
Yep. So, yep, there we go.
Okay. And then that.
My other question was about this one. I didn't know if we had left that one in there.
I think that was Tony Condotti's language.
That was not, but I think it's superfluous now that the council has stricken that language.
So that can
this
be
is going on.
Yes.
Yes.
Ronnie, can you scroll back down to 050D again, please? Yeah, I'm not seeing that. Okay, never mind.
Okay. So,
quick question: the bullet point on the provide a minimum of 2 public meetings for members of the public.
oh, you're right. Yeah. Councilmember.
What part is that?
The bullet above the bullet there, middle of the page. Go back up to where you were. Right there.
Oh yeah, that was my question. If that was saying.
I believe that was a friendly amendment offered that I think was.
We talked about having our communication specialist be the point person to get input from the community between this first reading and the second reading.
Correct. Thank you, Martine. Okay. I think we may be there. Okay. Okay.
Actually, 050D does include private property. If of that, so or the second line, city-owned parking lot, closed portion of right-of-way on private property. So sorry, I missed that. I think that we should include that.
The same C sentence above.
Yep.
Okay.
The exception for religious assembly uses and school sponsored. Sorry about that. Cassie caught that, thanks to her.
Oh, you can just plug that in at the end of that sentence.
Like that sentence, yeah. Any other things, Lee, that you've seen, or we? Looks like we're there. Okay. Martine, does this look right to you?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Do a roll call vote then.
Okay. Councilmember Watkins?
Aye.
Kalantari Johnston?
Aye.
Brown?
No.
Cummings?
No, and I'd just like to, for the record, state that I am supportive of the safe sleeping storage programs, many of the amendments, but many members of the public have not felt that there's been a clear and transparent process to provide feedback and engagement, and that's why I'm registering my no vote.
Same.
Brown? Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, yeah, aye. Sorry, aye. Is it?
Vice Mayor Brunner?
Aye.
I'm sorry for interjecting, but the council did also discuss deleting subsection J, which was subsection J of section 080.
Right.
I have that.
She's got
Okay.
It was on there. I don't think we made it that far down, but.
All right, sorry, bring it up.
Right. I had a note that that had been agreed.
think I was at Vice Brunner.
Aye.
And Mayor Myers.
Aye. That motion passes. Excuse me, let me just grab this. That motion passes with 5 yes votes and 2 no votes. And so that will conclude our meeting this evening. Just want to thank everyone and the public for being here tonight. And our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.